Well, if you hear the velvety tones of Barry Tompkins in Rocky IV and recognize that, you not only won a trivia question, but you've also won the ability to hear more about him, his life, his career, and his importance in our lives. This is Harper LeBel. You're watching Take 5 with Steven Travers. Welcome to 100 Yards of Football, everybody. Our show today is produced by Logan Landers. Thank you, Logan, for all that you do. And Steven, this is not only a friend, but a guy who's got a legendary status. He's got a little cult following because of his connection with boxing, obviously with the Rocky movies, so many different things. But we're going to talk to your buddy, Barry Tompkins, today, and he's going to be all of our buddies by the end of this. Thank you so much for bringing him on.
Well, this is a tremendous pleasure. And let me tell you, Barry, I want to welcome you to Take 5 with Steven Travers. And I want to let you know that I have gotten quite a few requests for you. And I've asked you a couple times. And the first, the people who just say that is a guy you need to have on Take 5 with Steven Travers. So this is how I meet Barry Tompkins. It's 2001. I have just been hired by the old San Francisco Examiner under the crazy editor named Dave Bergen, who's not with us anymore. What a piece of work he was. Whew! And I'm literally a colleague of Hunter Thompson. He's on the right side of the front page, and I'm on the left side, complete polar opposites of our politics. But anyway, so I'm at Pac-Bell Park. It's early in the season, and I see the magnificent Lon Simmons, and I go up to him. I introduce myself. Hi, Lon. My name's Steve Travers. I've just been hired by the San Francisco Examiner. Lon Simmons, the greatest gentleman in the history of gentlemen, leads me all around the field, into the clubhouse, up to the press box, and he's introducing me to John Miller, and he's introducing me to Mike Krukow and Dwayne Kuiper. And he's introducing me to Dusty Baker. And he's introducing me to Bruce Jenkins. And I already knew Bruce McGowan. He was really, and I think I knew John Shea, who was with the Chronicle. Introduces me to Marty Laurie, a guy I became good friends with. And he introduces me to Joan Ryan and Barry Tompkins, the power couple of San Francisco journalism. Joan, longtime, wonderful columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, and the magnificent Barry Tompkins, who I don't even know where you start with Barry Tompkins. He's done, there's a career. If anybody wants to have a career, that's a career, because he's done everything. You can't get bored with the career that Barry Tompkins has had. And so we're going to talk about that today. We're definitely going to talk about Rocky IV and his incredible work. We heard just now him talking about it's going to be World War III in Moscow. And, you know, how it was working with Sly Stallone and Dolph Lundgren and Brigitte Nielsen. What an unbelievable moment in pop culture history. The absolute epitome of the Reagan 80s cinema. Yeah. So, Barry, thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, the Rocky thing came about, like most of my life, on a fluke. I was working at HBO then. I had a couple of weeks off where I didn't have a show. And that gig was actually offered to a good friend of mine, and maybe somebody you know too, Steve Fizziak. And
sure.
But we had the same agent at the time, and so when Steve couldn't do it, he was doing baseball, and so so she called me and said, "Hey, Steve can't do this gig. Is it possible that you could do it?" You know, and I happened to have a couple of weeks off, and I've never really been too, you know, acting or theater has never really been, while I appreciate it, you know, as a member of the audience, I never really aspired to it very much. But I thought, well, it's 2.5 weeks. That scene took 2.5 weeks to shoot. Yeah, and it was in Vancouver, BC, which I really like. And so I thought, well, sure, I'll go. And they were paying me nothing. I mean, it was $2,500 for 2.5 weeks. You know, and I thought, well, you know, it'll be an experience. So I went, and frankly, it was the most boring thing I've ever done in my life. I walked out of there just hating it. I wasn't even going to watch the movie. And because because we were ringside, we had to be in every shot for the entire 2.5 weeks. And most of the time doing nothing except just sitting there. So you couldn't read a book, you couldn't do a crossword puzzle. So 8 hours a day, we were just sitting there ringside, watching dance routines, And so I hated every minute of it. And my part of it was one day. And it wasn't even one day. We finished it in a half a day. And which probably speaks to, acting obviously is a totally different job than what I do. And about this, the red light goes on, you start talking, the red light goes off, you say goodnight, and there's no time to fix things, So I come from a one take world, that's what you just have to be able to do it. And everything there, we're talking 15, 20 takes. And it's every little scene is maybe 30 seconds long. So it's really boring. So what he did, and I worked with a guy, Al, I can't even remember his last name, to be honest with you. That's actually what I looked like back in, was it 1984? I don't even remember what year. Yeah. And what Stallone told me, and this is the thing, one of the first things that really impressed me about him, he said, basically, do what you do when you just call a fight, but go half again over the top, And there was a rough script, but he let me ad lib, and so I did, where I normally say there's a left and a right, and he's down. It would be, there's the left hand, it's the greatest left hand I've ever seen, and out of this way, and all that kind of stuff, that you would never do on live television. But he loved it, and so my part took 2 takes, and and that was all. That was the only thing I really had to do besides sit there and all day. And on top of everything else, it was summer in Vancouver, but any of you who remember that film, it was winter in Moscow. So everybody had heavy coats on. The place was 150 degrees. It was in this little, like a high school gym. So I just hated it. I came home and, told my wife, this is awful. I just couldn't stand that, So it turned out actually that because of the way they cut the film, again, I don't know anything about how Hollywood works or how contracts work or anything like that, but they paid me $2,500. The way they cut the film, I became a principal. And so to make a long story short, that $2,500 turned into, I'm embarrassed to even tell you, I couldn't even begin to, I don't want to go there, but suffice to say, I'm still getting checks. And last year, I still got probably $10,000 from that film. I have to what I got back in the when it was first released. It was stupid.
I have to tell you a similar story, Barry. I grew up with a kid by the name of Mike Murphy. Went to Redwood High School with me. One day in 1971, Mike Murphy was riding around Ross, in front of Ross School on his Stingray, and there was a movie crew in front of Ross School. And he's driving along, and it's Francis Ford Coppola sees him and says, "Hey, kid, how'd you like to be in a movie?" And Pacino and Diane Keaton are walking down Ross Commons, and up comes Murphy. I've seen it 8 million times. "Hi, Miss, whatever her last name was." I don't remember her last name, but anyway, he says hi. So he has a speaking role. He later became a general in the United States Army. He was in the 101st or the 82nd Airborne. And, but to this day, like you say, he still gets checks from a speaking role in The Godfather. So, and I imagine you're a member of the Screen Actors Guild too. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I was always a member of AFTRA, and now the Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA merged.
That was actually the second fight in that movie. The first fight, of course, is Creed losing to Drago in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. That was done by Stu Nahan, who had done the original. I used to run into Stu Nahan at Dodger Stadium. So, I'm with some really high-end circles. Stu Nahan, who's not with us anymore, but was a wonderful figure in Los Angeles sports media back in the day when television.
He He was captain
Oh.
of Sacramento.
He was great.
Did a kid
And now
show in
you.
Sacramento.
So yeah, it was something else. What about, is there, I imagine it sounds like you were pretty much cloistered on the set. You see any sparkles of romance between Stallone and Brigitte Nielsen?
Yeah, truly, I really kind of felt sorry for the guy because he can't walk out of his hotel room without being mobbed, and they were an item at that time. Actually, I don't think they were still an item at that time because she was with, I want to say she was with Drago, with
Dolph Lundgren.
Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah.
She was with him at the time, I think. And as a matter of fact, the one story I do remember was the two of them got into an elevator in the hotel. And I was already in the elevator. It was just the three of us in the elevator. So Dolph Lundgren's about 6'5", as you pointed out, cut. And she's 6'3", and Dolph is wearing a yellow jumpsuit, and she's wearing a chartreuse dress with a hat that filled the elevator. And I'm 5'7" and 128 pounds, or maybe then I was 140. But it was like the bar scene in Star Wars. I felt like I just walked into the bar scene in Star Wars.
Wow.
They were surreal, So yeah, I'll tell you one story about her. I always thought she was a no talent. She looked good, I guess, not my type, but she looked good. But there was one scene in there, and maybe you remember this scene. It was where the fight started to turn. And so Stallone was coming on, Rocky was coming on, and he was starting to lose it. And in the scene, his manager, who's sitting in the crowd, runs up onto the ring curtain and says, something to the effect of, "You're blowing it." He does his whole diatribe, and it's all in Russian. Yeah. Now, this guy's a character actor. You've seen him a million times in movies. I couldn't tell you his name. I didn't know his name then. But he's a real pro. And so the whole thing is about 40 seconds. And it involves him running up the ring apron, doing this diatribe, all in Russian, and running back to the audience. And so at the end of all that, she has to stand up in the audience and say, her line is "Niet." That's her line. Roll the cameras, take one. He runs down, 42 seconds, perfect, in Russian, doesn't speak Russian. He runs back up. She stands up, says, "Niet." Rocky stopped the camera, take two. Runs down, runs up in a ring apron, 42 seconds, perfect timing, out on the second, all in Russian. He doesn't speak Russian, back to the audience. She stands up, "Niet." So Rocky goes through every emotion. Give me anger, "Niet." Give me fear, "Niet." Give me all. He went through every emotion known to mankind. 42 takes, and she booted it every time. And Rocky finally says, "We'll fix it in post."
Unbelievable. I actually, in preparation for this, I actually saw Rocky IV on just about 3 days ago. The whole movie from the beginning to the end. I've probably seen it 20 times, 25 times. I've probably seen the original Rocky 40 times. I mean, these are movies when they come on, that's it.
I've seen Rocky IV once. And that was
well, this might be the best one. I mean, and this is a Reagan era movie at its peak. You had all these movies. Stallone was in a lot of them. Schwarzenegger was in a lot of them. Chuck Norris was in a lot of them, where we're going to go back, we're going to re-win the Vietnam War, or we're going to defeat the communists, or we are going to get the POWs back, or everything that happened in the 70s or Vietnam or whatever, we're going to rewrite it. And this was the thinking in this movie. But looking back at it, and you've got this guy who plays the Gorbachev character, and he's Gorbachev. He looks just like Mikhail Gorbachev. Exactly like him with the whatever that he had, a skin graft or a birthmark. Yeah. And you talk about, the acting was really great in this movie. You have some very, very high emotional moments.
Yeah.
Carl Weathers, when he's explaining to Rock, well, warriors, man, at the end of this, you'll understand, I mean, you're getting the athlete's creed, the warrior's creed, the idea, speaking of the word creed, you're getting the idea that, this is what the athlete does. When the athlete comes to the end, hey, you're 30, you're 35, and you're at the end of the road. This is when everybody else in the world is just coming into their own with their careers and their money.
Carl Weathers, I can tell you, when I was doing local news in San Francisco, Carl Weathers was playing for the Raiders, and
Sure.
So I knew he was interested in acting, so we took him to a theater down on Broadway, San Francisco, and put him up on a stage and spotlit him, and he did a monologue from Othello, and it was brilliant, brilliant. And which we ran on the air. In fact, I think CBS Network picked it up. And I'm not saying that's what started him into acting, but he had chops. I mean, this guy was not just a jock. He had acting chops. And
I believe that he played for John Madden first at San Diego State and then with the Raiders, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he might have.
I think Madden was an assistant under Don Coryell.
He might have. He was a lovely guy. Just a lovely guy. He really was.
Yeah. Well, he was going to. At one point, he was supposed to direct the movie version of my book, One Night, Two Teams. Mm-hmm. And I talked about this was how I got involved with the Papadakis family. And he passed away. And that movie is just, I don't know whether it's cursed or not. But getting back to all of these emotions that these actors show, but you also, there's what a great actor can also do. You talk about just eye contact or a look on a face, and the look on the faces of some of these Russians as the fight turns, as they're looking at each other, making eye contact, and the Gorbachev character looks at his second in command with this look like, then slowly but surely he claps and everybody else claps. And then Rocky comes up, and here's this guy. You can make fun of Sylvester Stallone, but this is a great speech. If I could change, you could change. I didn't know how I felt about you people, And this is the Cold War coming to an end 4 years before the Berlin Wall, and it truly is a cultural touchstone, and you were part of it. And I
told you, I came away really impressed with Stallone. I really did. He's more than just an actor and more than just a these guys, those guys kind of guy.
Right.
He gets it. He really does. At least that's my experience from that one film. I don't know what he was like in the beginning. I don't know what he was like. I don't know what he's like now.
He's a writer. He's a writer too, Barry. He wrote.
He's a very extremely. That's my impression. A really talented guy who. I didn't get him as a bully or as dictatorial, or he seemed to treat people really well.
What about Lundgren? Now he's a PhD. I mean, talk about
I never really,
a jock with a PhD.
Guy. I never really interacted with him too much.
Didn't
Shara didn't. She was lovely, and she's a great person. So we're all lovely here in the Bay Area.
Yeah. Well, of course, she was in The Godfather, obviously. And her role in all those Rocky movies is just fantastic. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about Rocky and your role in it, and anything else you want to add, that's great. But
the only thing I would say about it's really interesting to me because I've been doing this stuff, for 60 years, and of every event that I've done, I've really been lucky in my career. I've done virtually every major event in the world I've either covered or broadcast, and people talk about this Rocky movie way more, 3 times as more as anything I've ever done. To this day, I'll get a kid in a basketball game, a college kid in a basketball game, and he doesn't know me from Adam, but he'll come over to me and say, "Hey man, I saw you in Rocky," So it
best $2,500 you ever made.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. So in that regard, it was really rewarding, but I hated it at the time. I thought I came away really impressed with Stallone. I didn't feel like, oh boy, I got to go back and do this again. This is my new career. So it was an experience, and one that I really value, but one that's talked about more than anything else I've done ever.
All right. Well, Harper, you heard it from Barry Tompkins, the master himself. Why don't you take over? I'm sure you've want to get into his biography and how it all started for Barry.
Yeah, Barry, we'll get back to Rocky, and obviously the cult
Don't,
following.
please. We're rocking out. We've knocked him out.
No, we have more. I was actually fascinated in the role change that Stallone had, where he had Stu Nahan in, but then he brings in you, and I'm not sure if that's a changing of the guard that was done on purpose, but for obvious reasons, it was a benefactory for you, for your career. You're still getting people at the grocery store, kind of pat you on the shoulder and do all that kind of stuff. And even though it probably wasn't the most enjoyable work experience for 2.5 weeks, most people would say, oh, I'd have given my left leg to do it. No, you wouldn't. Not to just sit in a chair for literally, 8 hours a day and not be able to move around. And the waiting, there's so much waiting in the movie world, and where
that's what it's all about. It bores the balls off the pool table.
But when they get it right, and evidently they did, right? More people watched that than just about any of the others, or at least collectively it was a part of that series, and you're a part of that. And we'll get to that. But your career starts. You've got San Francisco Bay right there behind you. You're at Belvedere Island is what we're looking at in the background.
I lied to you. I said it was Belvedere Island. It's Angel Island.
Well,
which is
we'll figure it out. It looks just like Belvedere. If it wasn't for that,
Belvedere's right on the other side of it, actually.
What I like to do is, obviously San Francisco and Northern California is dear to you. You grew up there, but your first job, 1965, is that correct? You started in the radio world. Tell us how that began.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I started in advertising, actually. And I just hated the advertising world. And the reason I always thought of myself as, a creative person. And I was working for a small agency. Now, if you're working for, at that time, Doyle Day and Bernbach was the big agency. They had the Volkswagen account, and everybody wanted to be on that account, because they would. Their theory was take the worst thing about a product and make it into its biggest sell, and I really embraced that, But my client list wasn't exactly Volkswagen, it was more used Volkswagens, and so what all the clients wanted to see is what's already been seen, and I wanted to do something that was hopefully somewhat original, So I got to really hating that business. And one of my clients.
Well, how old are you at this time? Isn't it? 20, don't you have to have? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was young. Well, I had some stuff. I had kind of a background. I don't want to tell you a kind of a show business background, but I don't want to. That's overstating it to say it was a show business background. But I used to write a lot of shtick. For there was a improv group in San Francisco called the Committee, and so I used to write a lot of shtick for them, So that was the kind of, and I wrote a little music, and always pointed toward humor, That's always been my.
Where'd you learn to play? Is this piano, guitar?
No, I don't play. We sang. I had a singing group.
Okay.
So I could do chords, but I couldn't really play the piano. So that kind of gave me what in the advertising business they used to call pinks. What can you show me? So even though I was only 23, or 22, I think it was. I had something I could show them. I wrote this. I could write this. I could do this. I could do that. So they hired me as a copywriter, and anyway, KCBS Radio was my client. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a broadcaster, but I didn't go to college. I was going to make $1 million in show business. So, I kind of gave up that ghost of ever wanting to really be a broadcaster because I had no background. And so KCBS hired me as promotions director. I was writing on-air promotions, stay tuned for so-and-so coming up at 8:00 tonight, And Don Klein, who I always call my rabbi, in the sports business, he to this day taught me everything I knew. He gave me things that I use to this day. Or if I'm teaching somebody or talking to a kid, I'll give him those same things that Don gave me 60 years ago. And I was such a sports fan then that I was in his office every day. And Don was doing like 6 commentaries a day, plus doing Stanford football and Stanford basketball. And at a million sports shows every day. So I said, come on, I'm a writer. I can write. Let me write your commentaries. Let me write your commentaries. And so I ultimately, after about 8 months of my being in his office every day, annoying him, he hired me. He said, okay, all right. And I'm sure he did it just to get me out of his face, you know. And so I went to work for him, writing commentaries and basically writing commentaries and kind of pointing a finger at him when he had to start and when he had to take a break, you know, and that kind of stuff. And then I produced Stanford football and basketball for him. And after about a year or two, you know, now I'm on him all the time to let me go to some interviews. You know, I'll go to the games at night. You know, you're not going to go to the games at night. I'll go do some interviews and so on. So he literally taught me how to do an interview, and he gave me a tape recorder. And I went to all the Warriors games and Giants games and 49er games and did all the interviews for him, brought him back, and he used them the next day on the air. But again, he taught me how to do it, you know. And at that time, when I started broadcasting, it was really a different world than it is now. You know, now there is no association between player, and you've been through this, Harper. I'm sure you know what this is about. You can't be friends with the players. You know, the communication is always behind a desk or never in a one-on-one situation. And even if there is, all the guy wants to do is get out of there. But when I started doing it, you know, frankly, the players weren't making that much more money than we were, you know. Yeah. So you could be friends. So I developed a lot of friendships amongst players. You know, Willie Mays adopted me. You know, I mean, it's kidding, but it's kidding on the square. And it was like that. You know, I spent so much time at Willie McCovey's house and at Mays' house and with the Warriors. You know, Nate Thurman was really kind to me, and I used to go hang out with him. And so I could build a relationship with the players, which you can't do anymore. So I did that for Don, did all the interviews, and then he gave me my own show on a weekend on Saturdays, or I think it was on Saturdays. It was a football scoreboard show on a Saturday night, and all I did was read scores for a half hour. You know, it was Slippery Rock beat California, Pennsylvania. You know, it was that kind of thing. Most boring show. I'm sure I could have said "fuck" on the air and nobody would notice. You know, because you know, nobody listened to the show, but I didn't care. It gave me chops. You know, and I went from there. Again, Harper, it's, you know, I always hesitate to tell my story because it can't happen the way it happened for me anymore. There's too many people that want it, too many people after it. Every college has sports media, journalism, you know, practical experience in studio things. I was teaching in college, just one class a week for about 5 years. And most of the kids in my class had a longer resume than I did. And I've been in the business at that time for 55 years, you know, and that's the way it has to be now. But the way I got into television, well, I don't know if you want me to go this far, but the way I got into television was I was having lunch. And here again, this talks about having friendships with people who are you grew up idolizing. And so I had made friends with Franklin Muley, who at that time was the owner of the Golden State Warriors, and Hank Greenwald, who was a broadcaster, did the Warriors with Bill King, did baseball, did the Giants, and we'd been friends. And so Hank called me one day, he said, "I'm having lunch with Franklin. Come on over and join us." So I go to this little restaurant, you know, in San Francisco. We're talking, and while we're at lunch, Hank says, "You know, I just turned down a job at KPIX Television. Why don't you call the guy?" Hank hated television. He was a radio guy, and that's what he wanted to be. Why don't you call him? And Franklin said, "Yeah, call him. You know, I'll help you if I need you." So that afternoon, I went back to my office, and I called this guy. And he said, "When can you come over?" And I said, "Well, I'm off work, whatever time it was." He said, "Okay, come on over." So I went over that day. I had lunch, finished my job at KCBS, went over to KPIX, met this guy. He said, "Do you have anything you could read?" And I happened to have a commentary that I'd written for Don Klein in my briefcase. And so he said, "Read it." So I read it. I read the commentary. And he said, "Okay, 3 shows a day, $18,000 a year. When can you start?" And that's how I got into television.
Amazing. One of the things I wanted to ask you earlier, if you don't mind, Barry, is during those early days when you're just getting started, you're out of the advertising world a little bit, you're starting to write and go on the air for yourself. What were some of the key points that were able to be used for all of your other successes behind the mic? Timing, hitting the mark, being able to know when to be quiet and let somebody else talk. Not that it's not being rude or disrespectful at someone else. It just the way a good show weaves, where you talk with each other. It's three guys sitting on a couch. It's you, it's your partner, and it's the audience. What were the things that really stuck with you? You go, man, if I able to get this down and not say or too many times and just get to the point, this is going to turn out real nicely for me. I really enjoy it, and I love what I'm doing, and I'm getting good at it. Was there a point that you were able to recognize that?
I didn't recognize that I was getting good at it until I was probably maybe a year and a half into television. But most of those things that you just mentioned, Don Klein taught me. You know, Don Klein, one of the things he taught me that I take with me to this day is that if you do your job right, you're like the referee. Nobody will notice you, you know, and I've taken that with me. I've never been a, hey, look at me kind of guy. You know, Don always taught me the other thing that the most important thing of broadcasting is listening. So you want to listen to your color commentator. You know, you want to tee them up, depending on who it is. Now, a guy like Petros, Steven, we can talk about him later. I didn't have to tee him up, but I can say anything to him. It's coming back. But a lot of color commentators, you have to tee them up, you know, and if you tee them up the right way, Dick Enberg taught me that. If you tee them up the right way, they'll get it back. Then you got to talk to them about, I need like 5 seconds before the play starts again. So you got to be out 5 seconds before. Don't wait till the ball snapped to get out, because then I'm playing catch up. You know, again, those are all things that Don Klein taught me. There was a couple of other things you said which escape me now that came from Don Klein. As far as timing, that just comes with doing it. You know, I did some basketball with Lynn Shackelford. You probably remember him, Steve.
Sure.
And Lynn was a wonderful guy, great player at UCLA, wonderful guy. But the producer would talk in his ear, you know, every now and then, and inevitably, Chris would say, I said that already. You know, that's going out on the air, you know. So you have to learn, you know, when the producer's talking to you, you got to hear him, but not lose your train of thought. And as far as timing is concerned, it's just a thing that has to come. So I hate to say it, but with time, you know, now I'm at the point, and got there after a few years, that, and this used to happen all the time. Now, I grew up in the days of guerrilla television, you know, where you better be able to ad lib, and you better be able to make a left turn really quickly, because at one time or another, I've seen everything with the studio walls come down. So, now it's not. Now it's much more. The science is much more perfected. You know, there's not breakdowns nearly, not even remotely as often as there was when I first started. When I was doing the news at KPIX, we used to call it "I've got a secret." You know, that the producer's got a secret, and it's up to us to find it out before the walls cave in. You know, so, and that was every day. Something happened every day. So you learn to ad lib, and you learn that even though the producer's in your ear going 10, 9, 8, 7, 4 minutes, you know, so now you're just getting ready to say goodnight or whatever it happens to be. And now all of a sudden you got to fill 4 more minutes. You know, I had it happen in New York doing a fight at the Garden. It was the Cooney Norton fight. I don't know if you remember that fight.
Sure.
And at that time we had to do 2 full hours. And we had 3 preliminary fights, which we don't usually start until near the top of the first hour. And, well, we started about a half hour before, but anyway. So the first fight goes a minute, second fight goes a minute and a half, third fight goes 45 seconds. So now we've got almost 2 full hours left. And so we tap dance as much as we can, because we don't want to start the main event until 10 minutes after the hour, maybe. So anyway, to make a long story short, the main event goes a minute and 10 seconds. And so, Norton got hurt in that fight. I don't know if you remember that, but Norton got hurt in that fight. And I was working with Larry Merchant. Normally Sugar Ray Leonard was with us too, but Ray was training for a fight. So he wasn't with us that show. It was just me and Larry. The producer tells Larry, go with the ambulance. So it's me now. We show all the replays. We do all the interviews we can, but it was the last fight. And the garden is emptying out, so I got nobody to interview anymore. My producer says in my ear, 42 minutes to off. And I got nothing. It's me. They've turned all the lights out in the arena because everybody's leaving. So it's just me and a key light. 42 minutes. And to this day, I couldn't tell you what I said, but we did it, and those are the things that I can't answer how those things happen or how you manage to do that. But I can tell you for a fact, the first 2-3 years in the business, there was no chance I could have done that. I'd have been reading my driver's license. So
I mean, you got to come up with the history of. They called him the Cinderella Man. Madison Square Garden. I can see. I can. The ghosts of the great boxers, Joe Louis. Rocky Marciano. They're all around me here at the Garden in the twaning light.
In that 42 minutes, I think I basically said the same thing 8 times, just 5 different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, but you know what? The funny thing about it is when you come out after one of those shows, you think, wow, that was great. When a show goes perfectly well, you say, okay, where are we eating?
Yeah.
So, but again, to go back, Don Klein was my guy. By the time I got into television now, I wasn't prepared for talking into a camera. That is a whole different thing too, and there was no prompters. Now you have prompters, which I hate, oh, by the way. And the reason I do is because you have to learn with a camera, and especially, like I said, I used to do or try to do, things. San Francisco is not a really serious sports market like New York. So I used to try to do things that, might be on the light side or have a throwaway line of some sort that maybe was somewhat humorous, So talking into a camera, the camera has no reaction to you. The camera's not going to sit there and go, ha, ha, ha. So you have to learn to come through the camera. You can't look at the camera. And that's frankly my problem with teleprompters. When you use a teleprompter, you're not coming through the camera. You're just reading the teleprompter. So it's not, to me, this is very esoteric, but it's not personal. And television is a very personal business. You're asking people to take you into their bedrooms. So, it's all a learning process. And, by the time I left KPIX, I felt like I kind of know what I'm doing.
Well, I have to say, I can never remember a time in which I did not know who Barry Tompkins was, because I grew up in San Francisco, and I don't ever remember a time where I did not know who you were, just heard your voice. You were ubiquitous. You were among several ubiquitous characters who were on the sports media market, giving me the scores on television, on radio, on stations that I was watching all the time at a golden age in which people were getting their information from local news. Now those days are basically over. Yeah. But you mentioned Don Klein. Harper, I don't know if you know who Don Klein was, but he was, if ever a man had what you would describe as an elegant voice or an elegant delivery, it was Don Klein. He was the voice of Stanford football for a couple of decades.
But also, Harper, he did the 49ers for about 10 years. But I think it was before you played.
Oh, yeah. Well before. I was a 80s guy in high school and college, and then late 80s, mid 80s with my experience when I began. But go, Steven, before I make any comments, please go ahead and finish with Don.
Yeah, I was just going to say he was a Stanford football broadcaster during the era of Jim Plunkett. Some really good teams.
That was my first year. My first year was Jim Plunkett's redshirt year.
Right. He was the 49er play-by-play, I believe their first 2 Super Bowls. Lon Simmons returned
He did the
And
catch.
now,
He had the catch.
yes. Yeah, he did the catch on the radio,
Right.
and Vince Scully did it on television.
Right.
So he was, and like I say, he had this, and I have to say, if you were a sports fan in the Bay Area, or really in all of the state of California, because I also rooted for Los Angeles teams. I was a USC fan from my earliest time. My father was a professor at City College of San Francisco, and he knew O.J. Simpson. And so I'm 8 years old, and it's like, who's Southern Cal, Dad? Is this California Southern Branch, UCLA? No, Steve, that's the University of Southern California. They're in Los Angeles. Why are we listening to them? Well, they have a kid who's in my class. His name's Renthal James Simpson. He's really good. And, I immediately become just a complete USC fanatic. So I'm rooting for Los Angeles teams and Bay Area teams. And it is the golden age, the 60s, 70s, the 80s, into the 90s, frankly. And this is the age that you're part of, this is your landscape. Now, we mentioned Don Klein. We're talking about you, but what an era for broadcasters. Lon Simmons, Russ Hodges, Monty Moore, John Miller, and then you'd mentioned earlier, one of my all-time favorites. If someone wants to say to me, Bill King is the greatest sportscaster who ever lived, I'm not going to argue.
I would second.
I love Vince Scully. I really do. But as a three-sport guy, he was unbelievable. So why don't you talk a little bit about your relationship with him?
What I always used to say is Bill King was the only guy I can remember to this day who he did radio and you could close your eyes and see the game, which is really something to be said. And he really knew what he was talking about. And really an articulate guy. One of the more interesting people I've ever been around in my life. At the end of baseball, now he did football at the time that I was with him. Did football and did basketball, but he didn't do baseball. He wound up doing baseball later, but he did football and basketball. And at the end of the basketball season, he would disappear until football camps opened. He lived here in Sausalito, and he had a boat, and he lived on his boat. And generally, he would go off sailing somewhere, usually in Europe, not with that boat, but usually in Europe. He'd go sailing, and one summer he taught himself Russian.
Yeah,
and I don't even know why. He just taught himself Russian.
Yeah,
never took a course. He was fluent in Russian by the end of the summer. He was a really unique guy. He never, another Bill Kingism, he would never spend more than $100 on a car. So he'd drive the car until it broke. He'd leave it, go buy another car.
I have to interject with a personal Bill King story. It's 1982. I was a minor league baseball player in the Oakland A's organization. And I get called up by Billy Martin to pitch in a major league spring training exhibition game at Phoenix Municipal Stadium. So I get there and I find a payphone. I call my dad and maybe a couple of my friends back in Marin. I said, I'm pitching for the A's against the Giants today. It's going to be on radio, and I think it's going to be on TV. You got to watch it. You got to listen to it. And so I tell my dad this. So the game is played. Believe it or not, I actually struck out 7 guys in 3 innings. It was just one of those days. It was magic. So after the game, I finally find a phone. I called my dad. I said, did you hear the game? And he goes, oh, my God, Bill King knew everything about you. Because you mentioned that he lived in Sausalito. So he read the Marin Independent Journal, and he used to read about high school sports. And, of course, I had played at Redwood, which was a dynasty. And here's Steve Travers. He's a lanky right-hander who played in the dynasties of Al Endress and the Redwood Giants baseball team in the 70s. He knew all about me. It was unbelievable, the professionalism, or I don't know whether he did the research on it or he just remembered it.
He retained everything he read. That was the other thing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I tell you, he was quirky. They always tell a story. He was doing a football game in Denver. And one of the things Bill always used to do, he'd do all the rehearsals and all the things he needed to do. Then he'd run out and he'd go to the men's room and he'd come back. And if it was warm weather, he'd take his pants off. He did the games in his Speedo.
Yes.
So he was doing that in Denver, and he went out and went to the bathroom, and he came back to the booth, and he got in the booth. He's taking his pants off, and all of a sudden, everybody's looking at him like he's crazy. He was in the owner's booth.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
The Denver owner or the Oakland
Yeah, the
owner?
Denver owner.
Oh, like
Well, if it was
Dan.
Al Davis, it wouldn't have been a problem.
Was that? That was Dan
I
something
can't
or other,
remember his
wasn't it?
name now. I
Dan?
did know his name. He died not long ago.
Yeah.
Pat Bowlen.
And
Yeah, I think it was
Dan
Bowlen.
Bolt. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, that's amazing.
No, that's that.
Yeah.
He was a strange man. They always kid about him. He always, when he was on the air, especially in basketball, he would keep a stopwatch in his hand. He'd click his stopwatch all the time, all through his play-by-play, all the time. One day he dropped his stopwatch and he couldn't talk.
Is that right?
No, we kid
That-
about it, but it's
That
not-
I did not know.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what was that about? Was this like
that-
every game, every
he was
sport?
an odd. Bill was proudly an odd duck.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, his
Like in
Back in
basketball.
that era too, Barry, if you'll remember, there's you had to hit your mark. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. So I remember watching Howard Cosell being filmed while he was reading the ABC Monday Night Football halftime highlights.
Mhm.
And back then, that was the only way that anyone had any chance at all to see what was happening around the league, unless you were in that city. The highlights wouldn't be shown from the Green Bay, Minnesota game.
Right.
So Howard had a stopwatch. He knew he had 45 seconds. He'd hit his stopwatch, and he'd say, Bloomington, Minnesota, Fran Tarkenton, and he would read Chuck Foreman gets it over the end, and the Minnesota Vikings hold on to win. And he had 20 seconds left to finish up. He said, Bud Grant and the Vikings will travel to Los Angeles to take on the LA Rams next week. And at 44 seconds, he goes, and that's the way it was, and he was done.
Yeah.
So I understand that aspect of it. Also, tell me a little bit about Bill King, John Madden. You got Ken Stabler. You had all of these very unique, eccentric Northern California personalities all mixed, and the team was pretty stinking good. There was something to talk about. They were bandits. They all belonged in San Quentin, if you ask me, but yet
That's
they
true.
played well together. And it was a story within the story. Every time you could talk about Mark Van Egan or you talk about the Stork, Ken Hendricks, there were so many different characters. What an unusual man and an unusual job being able to make beautiful music together with all of the Looney Tunes that were around.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, it started with Madden. Matt, his whole thing was show up for the game. That was his mantra: show up for the game. Whatever you did prior to the game, and I can tell you a firsthand story about some of those, but that didn't matter. It was be ready for the game. But along those lines too, I asked him one time. I asked John, I said, what about the silver and black? I mean, that whole image, I assume that's nurtured, And he said, well, he said, one time we thought about wearing pink and white, but he said, then people would say, here come the good guys. And he didn't want that. He didn't want here come the good guys. He wanted silver and black, and here come the bad guys, Yeah, they were, oh God. I could tell you, one of my early chances with the network happened with a Raider game in New York. They were playing the Jets. And so I wanted to do all the right things, and those guys were all friends of mine at the time. So, it was the night before the game. I know they're not going to get in any trouble, So I called Fred Biletnikoff, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, oh, Kenny and I are just going to dinner at this Mexican restaurant in New York. He said, come with that. Okay, great. So I know they're playing the next day. They're not going to get in trouble. So we go have dinner. We stopped off at someplace, we had a couple of drinks. And then Kenny said, oh, one more thing. So we wind up at Studio 54. And we went from Studio 54 to the game. Never got my suitcase back from the hotel. I don't know if Kenny did. I don't know if Freddie did. And Kenny threw 4 interceptions that day. And we lost to the Jets, But
Wow.
yeah, but I mean, that happened other times, and everything was fine.
What year was this, do you say?
Gosh, 70. 75, maybe 76.
Was Namath the quarterback for the New York
No, it
Jets?
would have been before that. It would have been before that because I went to New York in
Well, they didn't lose a lot of games.
72, 73, somewhere in there.
Right.
It was shortly after Stabler took over from LaMonica.
That is, I mean, that I've never heard that story, but that's typical. That's the kind of story you think.
Another story I'll tell you.
You think is true, and you're telling me that it is.
I'll tell you another story, Harper, that speaks to what you were talking about. So we're on a flight going to a game. I don't remember where the game was, but remember Warren Wells?
Sure.
Well, so Warren Wells, he was an odd guy to begin, great player, but he had some mental issues. And the flight attendant was walking through the aisle. She had drinks for everybody, you know. So she's walking through the aisle, and she gets by Warren Wells' seat, and the plane hits an air pocket, and the drinks go all over the place, including all over Warren Wells. And all Warren Wells did was look at her. He just looked at her, and she put the tray down, went back to the front of the plane, never came back again. It was the definitive if looks could kill. Yeah, and that's who those, you know, John Matuzak was the loveliest guy, nicest guy in the world. Talked about his mom, took care of his mom, put him in a football uniform, or give him a couple of drinks. You know, either one of those. Sometimes they were synonymous. You know, and he was out of control. You know, mean, out of control guy. You know, the Otis Sistrunk was a guy they called.
And crazy, Barry, if you don't mind me saying so, I appreciate you saying that he loved his mother, probably a family guy, never did anything. He would pet a butterfly, you know, things like that. But you're right. He is scary huge in terms of just his size, right? You said you're 5'7", 125 pounds. This is a man that doesn't belong in a man's body. He's so big and ominous. And on Sunday afternoons, you want him at the bar fight. You want him in your foxhole, and you want him playing defensive line for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a whole bunch of guys on that team. Alf Dotson, he was another guy who was same kind of personality, exactly the same.
Well,
sorry, my dog is.
So Barry, there was a writer for the Examiner named Wells Twombly.
Yes, there was.
And he wrote a really good book called Fire and Fury, the Story of the Silver and Black. And in this book, he's talking about a guy, I believe his name was Ron Wolf, and he was the general manager of the Raiders. And I don't know to this day whether Twombly was just implying or lying or just saying it for effect. But he says that during World War II, Wolf worked undercover in East Berlin. And I'm going, whoa, wait a minute. Are you serious? I don't know whether it's true or not. But the point is, it spoke to this entire concept of the Raiders / as CIA, the Raiders as a secretive outfit, this being Al Davis's thing. Now, this leads me somewhere, and it leads me to Greg Papa, who is a friend of yours, and you wrote about him recently, and that was really why I was motivated to get you on the show to talk about Greg Papa. I go back with Greg as far as I go back with you, but I really was friends with him, and he had me on his show a few times. And so early on, it was right around the time that I first met you, and I'm over at the Oakland Coliseum, and the Raiders were contemplating getting Andre Rison or Jerry Rice. They were going to bring in a wide receiver. And I see Greg Papa, and I say, Greg, do you think I could quote you as a Raiders source? He goes, oh, absolutely, I'm a Raiders source. I'm employed by the Raiders because they employed their announcers. They weren't like announcers for the radio station, as was often the case. No, if you work for Al Davis, you work for Al Davis. I said, who's it going to be, Rice or Rison? And he goes, it's going to be Rice. Rison's done too much living, as he put it. And I said, can I quote you as a Raider source and get a scoop on this? He said, absolutely. So I did, and it was printed, and it was a scoop. So, and of course they did get Rice. So we fast forward 7 years, and I write a book called the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly Oakland Raiders, History of the Oakland Raiders. And I have this chapter called The Raiders CIA, where we apply all this secrecy and sort of use of the media by Al Davis. And so I wasn't really sure why had Greg Papa told me definitively that they were going to sign Jerry Rice. Did they want to get that out there as a trial balloon to see how the fans felt? I certainly didn't think that the fans had a problem with Jerry Rice being a Raider. He was certainly a Bay Area icon. Anyway, I printed it. I told the whole story, and I talked about how Greg had told me this. Oh my God. I get a phone call from Greg, and goes, "Oh my God, you're going to get me fired by Al Davis. You've revealed all this inside shenanigans, you know." And I'm going, "Well, I mean, I thought that's how it had gone down." And he goes, no, I was just giving you an opinion, and I'm not sure exactly what the problem was, but it was a kerfuffle. We got it squared away, and obviously Greg continued to be the Raiders announcer for many more years, and then the 49ers announcer, and now he's recovering from an illness. But that speaks to this secretive idea of Al Davis. So why don't you talk about where you saw that? You know, what was he like behind the scenes? How secretive was he? What could you or could not talk about regarding the Raiders?
With Al Davis, it always depended on the time and the place and what his frame of mind was. I really had a soft spot for Al Davis, which was not easy to do because he's a tough guy, as you know. He was, I don't know, I'm not going to say he was, not diagnosing him as bipolar, but he could be one way or he could be the other way. And you pick your spots, you know. But I will tell you this, I learned, and I will tell anybody who asks me this question, I learned probably more about football from Al Davis than anybody else. And if there wasn't anybody else, it was Ron Wolf, and I want to talk about him too.
Okay.
But Al Davis, he would go to every practice. And I'm sure this is one of the reasons why he never hired a head coach who he felt could usurp him. You know, they all had a kind of answer to him, including John. John got more independent as it went on, but he would see, like I remember one time Bobby Chandler was on the team, wide receiver, really good wide receiver, came from the Chargers.
Sure, USC Trojans.
And they were just doing, it was just one-on-one drills, and Chandler was running routes, and Al Davis was standing there watching him, He said, Bobby, called Bobby over. He said, Bobby, that first jab step, that's only about 4 inches, and you're making it 8 inches, and that's slowing you up. If you just take that half step back, and Chandler told me later at the end of the season that if Al, that was something that he didn't know he was doing, that Al told him about by just watching him in a one-on-one drill, that made him a better receiver that year. And that's just one example, but now that was the upside. One of the downsides was Al's fascination was with size and speed, ergo Harper, John Matuzak, but the classic guy was a guy, I don't know if any of you will remember this guy. His name was Charles Filion.
Sure.
Charles, he was a defensive end from
large Charles Filion.
Yeah, he was big and he could run.
Yeah.
Didn't know how to play football, and not the sharpest knife in the drawer. The story, there's many of them, but so when the players used to come into camp, the PR guy would give them like a bio form. Just tell us about yourself. Where'd you go to school? What'd you take in school? Your family, your hometown, all that sort of stuff. I think he went to Texas Southern. I don't. Texas Panhandle, I think it was, and so we were talking to him, before he ever stepped on the field, just going from his bio, and so somebody asked him, wasn't me, but somebody asked him, "What'd you take in college?" And he got really defensive, and he said, "Nothing, man, just a couple of pair of shoes and a jersey." Yeah, and I mean, there's many Charles Filliot stories. You know, he one time he asked the trainer, he asked Anderson, the trainer, he asked him, "Do you have any colder ice?" You know, it was ice in his knee. He said, "Do you have any colder ice?" You know, and Anderson said, "No, but going up to the doctor's room, you know, he may have something for you." You know. Well, at that time, there was a guy named James Thomas who was the quarterback for them, and they called him Dr. Death. So instead of going to the doctor's room, Filliot went up to James Thomas's room and said, "Anderson told me you had something for me," you know, and it was all that James Thomas could do, but to clock him, you know, it was Dr. Death. He went to Dr. Death's room to get colder ice, you know.
Oh my gosh.
And I could do
Strange but true, Barry. And I lived in a world where for 11 years, I saw things like that happen almost on a daily basis.
I bet you did.
That would fall right into that type of scenario. Yeah. No, I didn't take a whole lot, just a pair of shoes and a couple of T-shirts. That's all I took.
Yeah, but what I was going to tell you about, who'd you ask about? Ron Wolf.
Yeah.
In my mind,
is that story that I quoted about East
that
Berlin?
I don't know. I'd heard that he had an interesting past. I don't know that I
Okay.
ever talked about it, frankly. We got to be pretty good friends though.
Okay.
But I don't. Have you come across him, Harper? Ron Wolf?
Absolutely. Are you kidding? So Ken Harrock, who was a tight end during the first and second year, ended up working. My understanding is this: when Bill Parcells, Ron Wolf, and Ken Harrock got together at the owners' meetings, they were inseparable. They would have drinks or they'd tell stories in a booth at a restaurant. Agents would come by and say, "Hey, we need to talk to you about this player." And they would just give a cold stare. Not now.
Yeah.
We'll tell you. Ron Wolf, and Wolfman is his, you know, they call him Wolfman, Harrock, and Parcells, inseparable. So I played for the Packers when Ron was the general manager there. He and Ken are great friends. Ken was the general manager with the Falcons for years.
Right.
So I'm very familiar with him. Well, and this is with all due respect, Barry, his significance to the league. And obviously, thank you, Logan, for having a picture of Ron in Canton, Ohio. Right now, Ken's not there, but Ron and what he learned from Mr. Davis, never called him Al. There was always Mr. Davis. There was that separation of this man is different. We treat him like we would our father. We have the respect that we need to for him. Please go ahead. I'm not going to tell any of my stories. I'm just letting you know that the reverence for Ron, for Ken, and for other people that were a part of the Raider Nation back in those days, it was very significant.
Yeah, well, that echoes the story I was going to tell, Harper. You know, it's not even really a story, but he had the greatest eye for talent I've ever seen in my life. And he didn't believe in the camps or anything like that. He believed in his eyes what he saw on tape, you know, or film. And if you look at a lot of the Raiders' lower draft picks and I think he even upped the ante at Green Bay. I think he learned a lot from Al at the Raiders, and I think he utilized that much more autonomously in Green Bay. I mean, you just look at the players who he brought in. You being one of them, Harper. You know, it's I think beyond reproach. I think I can only speak for myself. You know, another thing about what I've tried to do in my career. I've never believed that I know everything there is to know. So I have gurus really in almost every sport. And Ron Wolf was one of my. Ron Wolf and Dick Nolan, who coached the 49ers when I first started, and Al were my football gurus, you know, and my basketball guru was Pete Newell. And, you know, baseball was Mike Krukow. And you got to have those guys to tell you the things that there's no way you can know unless you were ever out there in a uniform, you know. And I
Did you find that easy, Barry, for you to be able to stand on the sidelines, walk up to Ron, and one day just say, "Hey, how's it going?" and then walk away. And then another day, "Hey, I really need some help. Can you explain something for me and tell me what you're thinking here?" And then him being able to do that, being able to get to that line and not cross it, but with respect, being able to learn. And the guy's teaching you stuff and you're appreciating it. And maybe he appreciates your listening.
Yeah, no,
I don't get to tell this a lot. And I'm going to tell you, Barry, because you're a good man. I'm not going to tell these other guys because they didn't invest the same amount of time in me as you did. Is there some truth to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would never pretend to criticize a peer. You know, everybody has their way of doing things. Everybody has their way of, you know, now, and this is particularly a sensitive point for me because I don't ever want to be one of those, boy, those are the good old days kind of guys. You know, now that I'm old and, you know, it's a whole new different ballgame. So the good old days are now for these guys, you know. So I'm not going to say they're doing everything wrong, but what's really changed is, as I told you, Don Klein told me, you know, it's the game that's important, and you're just chronicling the event. You know, if you do your job right, nobody notices. You know, whereas now it's, hey, look at me, hey, look at me. You got to be posting stuff. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be there. You know, that's just the way of the land now. You know, so I never believed I knew everything there was to know, even though, God, I've done, you know, thousands of basketball games and, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of football games. And I probably know as much about boxing. In some cases, I know more about boxing than the boxers, you know, because they just think of themselves as tough guys, you know. But it's always by learning at the knee of somebody else. And if I do tell a story on the air, I will usually quote my source, you know. So-and-so told me this, you know. And your point is well taken too. You got to pick your spots. Yeah, and you got to become known. You got to be like an old shoe that they're comfortable with, you know. And in fact, I've had many conversations with guys like Ron Wolf or Bill Walsh, that I got to be pretty close to, you know, and if they tell me something, I say, can I use that? You know, and if they say, no, I won't, you know, but I'll paraphrase it somehow that I can still use the item without attributing it to them. And that's just always been my attitude, you know. Now, you talk about Greg, and Greg is the true professional. And I can tell you this unequivocally, nobody prepares for a game better than Greg. Nobody, you know, and I include myself in that, you know, and I think I'm pretty prepared going in, but he just has it down to a fine art, you know, and you rarely ever hear him make a mistake. And he's very knowledgeable about the lingo of the sport too.
Oh my God! Yeah.
You know, and Greg has contacts. He knows a lot of people at the 49ers. You know, he knew a lot of people at the Raiders. When he was doing the A's, he knew a lot of people at the A's. Knows a lot of people at the Giants, Warriors, same thing. You know, and because he takes that same kind of approach, he's not in people's face. They talk to him because they trust him.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, he was very open to me right from the get-go. Like,
yeah, he's
wow,
and I mean
very open guy.
And that's why he's a great broadcaster. Now he's got
Right.
the chops, and he knows what he's talking about. You know, I'm sure there are times that Tim Ryan is a great guy, and they have a really nice team, and for them it works, even though they are over the top of each other a lot. But I'm almost be willing to bet in his heart of hearts, he would ask Tim to back off a little bit and let him call a play, you know, because it is, you're a team up there, just like Harper, you're a team on a field, you know, or if you're in a tight end room, you're particularly a team with the tight ends, you know, and you got to get along with the quarterback. So it's you and the quarterback, you know, and it's the same thing with me and a color analyst. You know, and you talked earlier about Petros Papadakis, and people always ask me, who are the favorite people you worked with, you know, and P is right up, if not at the top, right there, you know, and
very unusual individual.
Oh, which is what I love about him, you know,
a genius. Level intellect.
Genius.
He
not
can
just
read a book. He can read a book in a night.
He majored in
and
Russian
retain
literature
all
at
of it.
USC, you know.
Oh, that's where I met him. I met him, and he's a running back at USC, and he's quoting Shakespeare.
And by
once
the way,
more into the breach, my friends.
Yes,
you know,
and by the way,
are you
he
kidding?
was the fastest guy on the team. In his freshman year, he was going to be a big-time NFL player because he was big and fast and smart. And but he tore his foot up so badly in his first year, and he was a running back. It wasn't a fullback. In his first year, I think he might have even missed a year, but he tore it up so bad he never had the speed again, so they made him a fullback. He was a short yardage guy. at USC, but he uses that. He plays himself down.
Yeah.
But the thing about P is that he is so smart. Yeah, I always say, he does a talk show in Los Angeles, and he screams and yells and carries on, because that's what they want, But I always said if they changed the format of that show to Korean Shinto, he could do that too.
He could.
You're
not exaggerating.
No, I'm not exaggerating. He's a chameleon. He could do, because he's really smart. He could do anything. He really could.
I mean, I've sat
working with him. Not only did we have I'm a foodie, so my criteria is when the game's over, I could care less who won the game. Where are we going to eat? And P is a foodie also. So we were just. I still consider him a great friend.
Where was your favorite after SC games at night?
To eat.
Where did he take you?
After SC. Well, we used to go to the soul food place not far from USC. I forget the name of it. I can't remember the name of it. We used to went to a steak place in Koreatown.
Yeah.
A lot of the SC
Taylor's maybe.
This place was, so this will give you an idea. This is typical LA. They don't have a phone number. It's a steakhouse. It's always jammed. I think it may be closed now, but they didn't have a phone number. If you go there and they like you, they give you a card, but the number on the card is not the right number. So they have to give you the unlisted number on a card if they know you and you want to go back. We used to go there. I can't remember the name of it. Sherwood's or something like that. I can't remember the name of it.
Right.
It sure made it hard for you to get a reservation, right? You just
I could not get a
show up
reservation.
and wait. Yeah.
I was going with him. But yeah, and the conversation, we almost never talked about. We talked about the game when we had to talk about the game, but we talked about everything. World politics. He
would talk about Plato and Aristotle.
He like I said, he's one of the smartest people.
Dostoevsky.
In the walk of life.
He's quoting from Crime and Punishment on his radio show.
Yeah. No, he truly is a remarkable guy. And the fun thing about him is, like I said, I could give him anything, and I don't have to tell him, here's how I'm going to give it to you. I can give him anything and I know it's, he's going to whack it back, and we can have a conversation, and he's going to do it in the period of time that he knows he should do it,
And he could easily be a comic too.
Oh yeah. No, he's great. His wife is great. He's got a great family. He's one of my favorite people. And sadly, we only talk 3-4 times a year now. I hope to see him actually. I'm going to LA Thanksgiving. I hope he's in town and we can get together at some point. But yeah, he was great. I've really been blessed, frankly, all through my career in almost every sport.
And not only that, Barry, because we're talking about a new era here. And I had said, okay, you were part of this golden era, but now we're talking Pete Carroll, who's a guy from Redwood High, and you were the announcer with Papadakis, probably 4 to 5 to 6 USC games a year. You guys did. You didn't do every game. Sometimes it'd be on another station, but there were quite a few games. Yeah. And this is the Pete Carroll era. And one of the greatest eras in the history of college football. So you saw some of the greatest football that's ever been played at the collegiate annals, right?
Yeah. No, we were really lucky. We had a lot of good games, and we had a lot of dogs too. But you know what? Sometimes the dogs you can have more fun with. To me, I've done big events. I broadcast the Super Bowl one year. I did the Rose Bowl several years. I've done the NCAA final. And I've done. I did Wimbledon for 15 years, and the French Open for 10 years, and the U.S. Open for 8 years, and tennis.
Oh God.
And those events, big events like that, you have to be a little bit more reverential. But sports, to me, is the toy shop. People always ask me, what did you do? I work in a toy shop, and especially out here on the West Coast. Now, when I went to New York, it was a little bit of a different deal. But out here on the West Coast, the sun's coming up the next day. Yeah, your team might lose, but sun's coming up. It's going to be okay. So we can have fun with it. I never thought of sports as World War III. And Petros to that end, I think we called the game and we did do justice to the game, but we also, had a couple of yaks along the way too. And,
Absolutely, yeah.
You
had great chemistry.
Well, it's happened right from day one. I have. He was great. Like I said, I've had, going back to my early days at I did the Pac-12, Pac-10. I think I even did the Pac-8. And my first football color commentator was Jack Snow. And we did several years together. And then I had Don Heinrich for a long time, the old Washington quarterback.
Sure.
And, very different guys from.
Did you ever work with Craig Fertig?
No, I know Craig. I don't think we ever did a game.
Didn't you and Petros replace Fertig and
we might have Phil Stone
and Tom Kelly.
Tom Kelly.
Did you replace that combo?
Well, I was there. I was doing it before Petros came. I had I think I had Heine. I had Rodney Gilmore.
Oh, that's right.
Who I love. Rodney's a great friend, has been since he played at Stanford. So I had him for about 8 or 9 years. And before that, I had Heine. And before that, I had Jack Snow. And I can't even remember who else. I had a million different guys. I had it up one time. My spotter in football still works with me. We've been friends since high school. And we were just adding up football color commentators at one point, and we got over 100. So I can't remember all of them, frankly. Basketball is more like 500, So, and even boxing, I've had 30 or 40. Tennis, now tennis, I was really lucky in tennis because at Wimbledon, I had Billie Jean King and Arthur Ashe, and the U.S. Open, and Barry McKay, who was a great guy. And then the French Open, I had Mary Carrillo and Fred Stolle, who I really liked. So I really hit the jackpot.
Not a bad gig either.
No, not a bad gig, but Billy and I've known Billy for 50 years. It's really scary, but and Arthur, I can do an hour on Arthur. I'm not going to bore you with it now, but one of the best people I've ever been around in my life.
I once interviewed Stan Smith, and we talked about Arthur Ashe at length. He goes back. He went back to UCLA versus USC with Arthur Ashe. Yeah.
I'm not going to get into all stories with him now, but and basketball. There's a guy here, coach at the University of San Francisco, Dan Belwamini.
Sure.
And we've worked together in college basketball. Now this will be our 41st year. And he wasn't the only guy I had. I had Vitale for 3 years, and
you worked with Dick Vitale.
Yeah, for 3 years.
Oh my God, you got to talk about.
Now, my thought, Barry, would be that he never gives the mic back. He just doesn't do it. He's going to talk and talk.
Yeah, he is.
Okay?
You have to do a different kind of broadcast with him.
Yeah.
Now, let me say.
Does he give you this when he wants you to shut up?
Yeah, no. He used to do that is.
The Lakers guy.
Dick Stockton was a broadcaster. Oh. They used to call him Heisman because if his color commentator started talking too much, yeah. But where was I going with?
That's beautiful. You're talking about. Were you going to talk about
Dick Vitale? You were going to mention something about
Dick Vitale.
Yeah, no. Dick is two different guys. On the air, he's one guy. Off the air, he's a completely different guy. And he has an agenda. He'll go in there with, and he was trying to help out high school coaches and trying to get assistant coaches head jobs. And, certain kids he liked, he was trying to promote and trying to help. So he literally would go into every game with a list. It had to be like 30 things that he was going to get into that game, no matter what, So it put the play-by-play guy in a position of always playing catch-up. Because he'd start talking and he'd say, have all his little sayings and try to promote different people and different guys, which was admirable. But in the meantime, when you do get it back, you got to say, well, 2 shots ago, that was so-and-so who made that one. And then so-and-so did this, and there was a steal. And, and so the score is such and such, and then bang, he's off again, and you're back to playing catch-up. But off the air, he was the total antithesis. We'd always go have dinner after the games. And if people came over to him, he would say, I'll do it on my way out, not now, we're talking here. And especially when he was with his wife, he was really not protective of his wife, but he didn't want her to be subject to all the people around him. And he was a magnet for people.
Oh my God, yeah.
So he's two different guys. And I really like the guy. Again, once a year or so, I'll just call him to check in, see how he's doing. But I have nothing but great things to say about him too. And he changed basketball color commentary.
Without a doubt, he was a guy that he was maybe a second coming of Howard Cosell. There's some folks that used to throw bricks at their television because of Howard. They couldn't stand him. I still remember there were bars in Pittsburgh, and because he had said something against the Steelers, people in Pittsburgh would throw a brick at the TV. They do film of it. They'd have a local news agency, and that just helped Howard's image. I know he personally didn't like it, but there's some times where Howard deserved everything he got because he'd say some stupid things.
Absolutely.
But Vitale was a guy that the diaper dandies and all the things that he would talk about was really, it was so up and positive that you really couldn't be mad at him. It may get old for you and you don't want to hear it again for the 50th time, but that was his shtick, right?
And he did everything with a smile. He would walk into the arena. I mean, this is like 2 hours before the game. Walk into the arena, and he always had a stack of books, his books, and he would throw them to the students, throw them in the stands to the students. And then he'd always go out on court maybe a half hour before the game and shoot free throws. And of course, the students would cheer or boo if he made them. Right? He was actually a good free throw shooter. But so he endeared himself, especially to the kids. They loved him. Everybody loved him. I loved him. He didn't have a mean bone in his body. He was really a good person. Howard, not so much. I got to know Howard pretty well too, because we were doing boxing. We didn't do it together, but oftentimes when I was at HBO, we had the live show and ABC had the replay. So he would call the fight also, same time as we did. So I spent many a flight going back and forth from Las Vegas with him, or wherever the fight happened to be. With him and did a lot of other stuff too, because I did the Olympics for ABC Radio, and so he was around all the time too, and I already knew him for boxing, so he kind of thought of me as I was okay, for him. He tolerated me, but he was an uber complex human being, The biggest issue for me that he had was he really believed he knew everything. He really thought he did. And for me, especially in boxing, he would go into a fight knowing how that fight was going to go. He knew this was going to happen in the fight. And if it happened that way, it was great. If it didn't happen that way, he never saw it. And at the end of the fight, he's, how can they call that fight that way? That's absurd, he just never saw the fight swing or change or be anything other than what he thought it was going to be, and he was a little bit too much above it all. He really believed he knew everything, even when he started doing football.
As long as you're talking about Howard Cosell, I want to ask you, he had a mentor by the name of Edgar Sherrick, and I wondered if you knew who Edgar Sherrick was.
I don't.
Well, Edgar Sherrick was a big guy in New York television in the 50s and 60s, television and advertising. He founded the ABC Baseball Game of the Week in 1960 and gave Howard Cosell his start. And Cosell credits him in his autobiography. And Sherrick founded and started Monday Night Football, but lost it in a power struggle with Roone Arledge.
Okay.
And he left Monday Night Football. He left New York and moved to Los Angeles and became a movie producer.
Huh.
And he bought a screenplay that I wrote, and I got to know him very well. Unfortunately, he passed away far too early and before I was able to really do a lot of work with him. But I wondered whether you had ever known Edgar Sherrick, because he was a fascinating figure himself. And
no, I spent a lot of time
mentor.
with Howard. I'll just say one short Howard story that kind of typifies what he's all about. So I'm riding on a plane with him from New York to Vegas. And we're in first class. And, you know, not a lot of people bothered him. 1 or 2 people came up and either made a comment or asked for an autograph or something. Not a big deal. And he's bitching about it. Yeah, everybody got coming over here. That bothered me. I'm trying to concentrate. I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do that. And then he would get up and go stand in front of the coach section so that people would come up and bother him. That's what he needed, but that's what he hated. You know,
That sounds, I'm not surprised. That
he's
sounds
just
like a story I can believe.
It's an odd guy. You know, most people respected him, but you won't find a lot of people who will say they liked him.
No.
Yeah, I agree in many respects. I think that there was a certain thing, if I were to summarize Howard Cosell, I remember him being followed. He was such a interesting character for Monday Night Football.
Absolutely.
Obviously with Dandy Don and with Frank, and a part of that group that really grew the game tremendously. And he's done with the show, and he puts his arm around Roone Arledge. He goes, "What did you think, Roone?" Roone goes, "It was great, Howard." He goes, "No, sir, there was a thing that I said in the third quarter. I wasn't quite sure whether or not that you got that. And did I go a little bit too far there or what?" And he was very sensitive about what he said and how he was appreciated. There was an insecurity that I gathered from watching that.
Absolutely.
Tell me.
They used to say about that show. So the producer, director, the 3 of them in the booth, and Roone, 6 players, 6 limos.
Really?
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? That they all had to separate. Yeah. I'm not riding with him. What do you mean? You're working with him.
He and Meredith did not get along, right? Is that correct?
No, or Giff. You know.
He didn't like Gifford, huh?
No. He thought Gifford.
I mean, how do you not get along with Frank Gifford?
I think he didn't think of Gifford as a peer.
Too much of a jock.
He was just not a real bright guy. He was a jock, yeah.
But good-looking man.
These are just things that I know from a little contact and a lot of talking to people about the guy. You know, but I did enough work with him that I saw him. Now, all of that said, and you mentioned this other guy too, Vin Scully and Howard Cosell were 2 of the best ad-libbers I've ever been around in my life. I mean, you were talking earlier, Harper, about timing and how you learn timing. So when we were doing the Olympics, Howard used to do a 5-minute commentary every day. And so when we were at the Olympics, if he happened to be out in the field someplace, like if I was doing I did track and field, and I also did boxing, he would come over and use our booth, to do his commentary. So he'd come over and he'd pick the headset up, and he would start to have a stopwatch, and he'd start a stopwatch, say, "Hello, I'm Howard Cosell," and he'd do a thing, and there was a commercial break in the middle of it, and he'd get to the break, and he'd come back, and there was maybe a minute to cap the thing, and he would do a minute, and it was 3 minutes and 30 seconds of content, and click that stopwatch, it was 3:29 every time, and Vinny was like that too. Vinny was, my contact with Vinny, beyond respect, which, wow, was my son-in-law was his producer. And so whenever Vinny was in San Francisco, I'd always go into the booth and pay my respects, And so I got to know him reasonably well, more through my grandkids than anybody else, because he spent more time with my grandkids than I did. And so we're just chatting it up. This was in his last year. So he was 87 or 88. We're chatting it up and so on and so forth. And he said, "Oh, just hang on one second. I got to do my open." Well, his open was the same thing, 3.5 minutes long. And he had both starting pitchers. He took shots of both starting pitchers and a key player from each team, And so he said, "Oh, just a minute. Pick that. Beautiful day here at Oracle Park in San Francisco. Wind blowing in slightly from the left. What a pitching duel this is going to be. It's so-and-so for the Dodgers. He's 5-2 with a 8.65, all the stats and all that. For the Giants, they're coming with their ace and so on and so forth. This guy's really tough on left-hand hitters, that kind of thing." you know, going to want to watch for so-and-so, you know, he's only right-hand hitter in the lineup today, so he should have a chance against this guy. And of course, for the Giants, they've always got Barry Bonds. And Barry Bonds, it wasn't Barry Bonds then, but, you know, so the whole kind of thing. He said, so we're looking forward to a great day. First pitch coming up right after this. And the guy, I was standing next to the stage manager, just counting him down. He's out on the last finger, puts the headset down, and says, so, you know, how's Rob? How are the kids? You know, it's like, unbelievable, uncanny, you know, 88 years old, pick it up, do it, put it down. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Barry Bonds, and I got to know Barry very well. What did you have any relationship with him? I mean, there's a mercurial.
Well, mercurial, operable word. I did the Giants one year, 1993. They were looking for somebody to do 50 games, and I thought I'd never done baseball. I did college baseball, but I'd never done baseball. And so I thought, well, home team, all that, 50 games, I could probably work it into my schedule. I might have to miss a few, but so I did it and worked with Kruko. It was Kruko's first year, and Joe Morgan. Those two guys I learned so much. You know, this is an aside, but I played baseball like all of us did, you know, every day when you were a kid in the summertime. And, you know, I thought when I went out, I thought I knew baseball. I realized I knew about that much of baseball. And I realized from Kruko and Morgan, there was this much more to go, you know. And by the end of the season, by the end of the 50 games, I mean, maybe this much more to go. It just was uncanny how much they knew. But anyway, Barry, again, you use the term mercurial. You had to walk into the clubhouse and put your finger in the air, see which way the wind was blowing for Barry. You know, I took my three-year-old son at that time into the clubhouse, and he wanted Barry Bonds' autograph. And I said, well, you have to, you know, wait till he's not doing this. Nobody in there. He's not doing anything. He's just sitting and call him Mr. Bonds, you know. So he did. He was 3 years old. And Barry Bonds told him to fuck off, you know. So that's the Barry Bonds that's not the kindest man. On the other hand, we were doing a game at Wrigley Field, and we were facing Dick Wakefield, who was a knuckleballer, you know. And Barry, that was the good Barry that day. So I went over to Barry and I said, what does a knuckleball look like? You know, how does it feel to you up there? What's it look like coming at you? You know, and he said, well, I'll tell you what, Bob Brenly, who was then the catcher for that, throws a better knuckleball than Wakefield. You know, so he said, come on. So this is like 3 hours before the game. So we went up on the field at Wrigley Field, and Barry Bonds caught, and Brenly pitched, and I had a bat in my hand. And Brenly threw me some knuckleballs, you know, that, you know, you couldn't hit him with a fly swatter, you know, and you couldn't hit him with a tennis racket, you know. And Barry said, you see? And we went back in. And the next day I went in and he blew me off, you know. So that was Barry. But subsequent to that, you said my wife is a writer, and she was writing a book called Intangibles. It's all about team chemistry. And she had Barry as one of the bad guys, you know. And it took her 6 months, and she was working for the Giants at the time. So she was in the clubhouse all the time. And Barry was always there because when Willie Mays was there, Barry was always with Willie and trying to help him out and get him food and that kind of thing, you know. So Barry was there all the time. And Joe knew Barry from when he played, but had no relationship with him. But over the course of time, they became friends, you know, and Joan said, you know, one of these days you're going to sit down with me so I can talk to you about this for my book, you know. And it went on for like 8 months. And finally, Barry said to her, he said, when do you want to sit down? You know, and Joan said, why now? Why all of a sudden? He says, because you were there. You know, she just kept showing up. And he was long since not playing, you know. And he lives not far from us. He's in Tiburon. And
right.
You know, and so she and he, even now, they go to lunch like once every 3-4 months.
Is that right?
Yeah, no, and they're buddies. And it turned out that he wasn't a chemistry killer. He had what she termed in her book as task chemistry. So on the field, everybody respected the hell out of Barry Bonds, you know. And he and Kent never got along with each other except on the field. And they both said, for Joe,
Kent got along with nobody.
They both said
I was friends with Bob. I coached with Bob Milano, Kent's coach at Cal.
Great guy.
And I said, "Did you ever get along with Jeff Kennedy?" He goes, "No, never."
Yeah.
So nobody get along with
no,
Jeff Kennedy.
But they both said separately of one another in Jones' book that there's nobody they'd rather play with on the field than each other. Because they both had that same kind of drive, and dependability. So anyway, the bottom line is, Barry, just 2 nights ago, the phone rings, 8:00. It's Barry Bonds. Wanted to talk to my wife. Maybe they have a thing going. I don't know.
That's hilarious. It's funny because when I'm back in Marin, I'm in New England now, but I'll be back in October. When I'm in Marin, I train at a place called Fairfax Fitness, and Barry regularly. What he does is he likes to ride bicycles.
Sure does.
And he will go. Across the street is it's called Good Earth. I think it's a Good Earth.
Yeah,
it's a
my
health
son
food
lives in
store.
Fairfax. So.
Yeah, and it's a health food store. And Barry goes there, and that's where all these bicyclists meet.
Right.
And they ride over White Hill to the Pacific Ocean and back.
I apologize for that. They're doing some work. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, I can barely hear it.
Okay.
Anyway, and so Barry is often seen at this Good Earth. I have never actually seen him. I've never had a Barry sighting, but I know a lot of people who say Barry was just here. And what I've heard is he's a completely different person than the guy who had that reputation. Totally. I'm Barry Bonds, and you're not.
Totally. We see him riding his bike through here all the time, and there's a little cafe that we go to every now and then in Tiburon, and I'd say I've seen him in there 4 or 5 times, and he's always, if I'm with Joan, it's like, whoa, but I know him a little bit, and I'll say, oh, I'm Joan's husband, Barry, and
very interesting.
And he's great. He's great. The
best athlete I've ever seen. Mays is a little. I saw him at the tail end. And I've seen Brady, and I've seen Montana, and I've seen Michael Jordan. For me, as a guy who's into baseball, I've never seen an athlete dominate a sport like Barry Bonds. You can talk Ted Williams, Rogers Hornsby, whoever you want to talk about. The combination of him working the count, getting walks, what he did for hitters ahead of him and behind him, operating it. Barry Bonds affected 6 hitters over the course of an inning, 2 in front of him, 2 behind him, 4 behind him, whatever. He's either on base and the pitcher's sweating it out because he's on second, or the pitcher's sweating it out because he's got 3 balls on Kent and Bonds is on deck, or whatever, or the bases are loaded and or Rich Aurelia gets a pitch he can hit. He hits 34 homers one year. He wasn't a guy who, that's my book, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Barry Bonds, Baseball Superman. The catcher is Chad Kruger from Redwood, who I call he's the Forrest Gump of baseball. He was in all the famous pictures of baseball.
That's great.
But yeah, nobody dominated like Bonds.
No, well,
let's not forget
he's
his stolen bases. His defense was excellent. A player of unbelievable ability.
He's the best hitter I've ever seen. And again, I apologize for this. It's not in our apartment. It's upstairs, so I can't do anything about it. He's the best hitter I've ever seen.
No question.
Especially when you consider he only gets maybe 2 pitches a game to hit.
Yeah.
Because they're not throwing anything over the plate, anywhere near the plate. That's why I want so much. But he doesn't miss a mistake. I bet he's hit 800 against mistake pitches.
They got Bonds to do, he sat down with a laptop and went over an at bat that he had against Greg Maddux, like 1998. And Maddux was they weren't in the same room. Maddux is analyzing the pitch from his end, Bonds from his end. These were 2 Michelangelos, dissecting a 3-ball, 2-strike, strikeout. I think Maddux finally got him at the end, and Bonds said, "Yeah, he was one of a kind," which he certainly was. Yeah, I mean, you talk about two unbelievable athletes. I mean, that would be like Bob Feller and Ted Williams, discussing it with each other. That's what makes baseball great, because it's within the team concept and the rivalries of the teams. You have these incredible. That's what the major leagues or professional sports is so great, because you have athletes who have faced each other over and over and over. It's not like high school or college where you're facing someone for the first time. Or you maybe UCLA plays USC and you're going up against Troy Aikman twice, 3 times, maybe.
Right.
You're a defensive back who has to deal with Ken Stabler twice a year for 10 years, right? And you're understanding the intricacies of the opponent, whether it's baseball or whatever, any sport. And it really becomes a mental game. I mean, the physical game obviously has to be there. The preparation has to be there, but the mental game of sports, and, you've gotten into that. Certainly boxing, they call it the sweet science. And, I always loved Jim Murray, and he loved boxing. He would dissect boxing like nobody's business. Who did you like among the columnists and the writers? I mean, certainly Bruce Jenkins comes to mind.
Well, Jenks is one of our best friends. We talk and see Jenks all the time. Jim Murray. I mean, I felt like when I first started writing commentaries for Don, he kept telling me, "Don't try to be Jim Murray." He was, to me, without peer. And Jenks. I always liked Scott Osler. I like very much Rick. I got to remember his name. Jesus, terrible. Wrote for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I like Jerry Green at Detroit. I'm spacing.
I know who you're talking about. He's a baseball writer.
He was the Atlanta Constitution also.
Furman Bisher?
No, not Furman Bisher. Although Furman Bisher was pretty special. I'll think of his name. I'm sorry. We see him all the time. He comes out here. He and Joan are very close.
Yeah, I used to be more familiar with a lot of these sports writers than I am now.
It's changed. It's changed.
Yeah, it's changed so much.
It's all about takes. You got to have a take. It's not about, you're not telling a story, or hey, how about that kind of story? You're telling. It's all about takes, and you got to have an opinion. You got to be, the Giants suck, that sort of thing.
How about Bruce McGowan? You know him pretty well?
Oh yeah, sure. I know him. We run into each other every now and then. I haven't really seen him a lot in the last couple of years, but
right. He's a good friend of mine.
Our whole business it's really towny. Everybody knows everybody. Especially once I started working for the network at a network level. I know all the boxing guys. I know all the football guys. I know all the basketball guys. Everybody knows everybody. And I'm sure if you asked, somebody in Baltimore about me, they'd probably at least know who I was. This is the way it is. Everybody knows everybody.
Well, you're a legend, Barry. I mean, and for no other reason. I mean, you would be anyway. But the fact that you did that Rocky movie, you know it as well as I do. That was
1 week, 2 weeks out of my life.
Yeah, that was a cultural touchstone, and one that I just loved. And I honestly think that was the best fight ever depicted in a movie about boxing.
Well, like I told you, it was consistent. It was like 2 steps over the top. You would never see a fight like that, obviously.
But they would kill each other.
Yeah, and neither one of them is very skilled. So, anybody who went in a real fight the way Stallone does with his hands down here get knocked out immediately.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's fantasy, and it's great fantasy. But any comparison to the real world it's fantasy.
Right. Huh. Okay.
Barry, so many different things that you've got to experience. We talked a little bit about Rocky earlier and all of the media that you've done. You said the Olympics and Wimbledon and U.S. Opens. My gosh, there's so many different things. Is there anything that you haven't done that you have on your bucket list that, man, I would love to work this before it's too late? Or have you accomplished pretty much everything?
It's funny that you say that. I don't know that I do. just trying to flash through my mind right now. But there, Sports Illustrated did a calendar one year, and they had 52 sports, different sports, sport for every week. And at that time, I had done 47 of them. So, you know, I got to love Wimbledon, but at the end, it became a love-hate because it's, you know, I like sports that are for the people. You know, that's why I don't like the U.S. Open either. But I love the French Open because the Parisians get to go. You know, I don't like the Super Bowl for the same reason. You know, in fact, pro sports in general. You know, I went to a Warriors game just last year, and we're sitting in these seats. They're good seats. They're not courtside, but they're good seats. And there's several people in the box with us, and nobody is talking about the game. You know, they're all talking about where they're going to eat after the game, or stock options, or, you know, whatever. And if Steph Curry does something spectacular in the game, they're like, that's not what I want from sports. You know, that's why I liked college sports and always did college sports. But even that now is getting bastardized, you know, as you know.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great if you're, you know, an Alabama supporter, a Georgia supporter, Michigan or Ohio State, you know, or Texas Tech.
Good times for those schools. Great times for them, right?
Yeah, great times for them. But, you know, especially where we are out here, Cal and Stanford. And in basketball, you know, little teams like St. Mary's and Santa Clara, those teams used to be pretty good because the guys would stay for 4 years. And at the end of 4 years, they were pretty representative. You know, St. Mary's was always beating teams. Gonzaga was great, you know. They have no chance now. No chance.
I love college baseball. Did you ever work with Ron Barr?
Yeah, sure. Ron.
Did you ever do college baseball with Ron Barr?
I didn't do it with him, but I did college baseball. Did the Pac-12.
Yeah, because when I was the coach at Cal, Ron Barr used to do some of our Cal. This was really early on in cable sports.
Yeah.
91, you know,
Yeah,
and I didn't even know the station, but he would do Cal baseball games.
Yeah,
I didn't know whether
you
did it with him.
But no, I would maybe do 15 baseball games a year, if that, maybe a dozen.
What are these Pac-10 games?
Pac-10, Pac-12, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What station was that for?
They were on Prime Ticket.
Prime Ticket, yeah. That's going back a little bit.
Well, and then later on Fox, what do they call it?
That station you did with Petros was that Fox Sports West?
Yeah, it was Fox Sports West. Yeah, and that's where a lot of the other games afterward. You know, they had those broadcasts up until the last couple of years.
And this is even before was the main Fox network doing college football yet?
I forget. Did they have the Big Ten? I can't even remember now. They had a couple of conferences, and they would do. Yeah, they had the Pac. They would do a game a week, maybe 2 games a week. But you know, there were 8 other games.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So,
well, what a career.
Yeah, you know, it's. But anyway, you know, Harper, to answer your question, really, I want to come out of an event feeling good about the event, not just feeling good about the broadcast or feeling good about who I'm working with or where I am or where we're going to dinner, you know. And I still get that sometimes from college sports, but, you know, boxing's a different animal altogether, you know. And, you know, and I love horse racing and I did some horse racing stuff too. And I used to really love that sport, and that sport now is just killed. It's awful, you know. You know, and my, you know, I did a lot of smaller sports too. Yeah, sorry about that. That's gonna be my next job, you know.
Yeah,
I'm just about retired now. I think I'll go up and hammer.
We do demo right during the podcast. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, you know, to answer your first question is I feel like I've pretty much run the gamut. There's probably, you know, I enjoy college basketball. I would still, if I could do 40 games, I would do 40 games. You know, I'm doing about 20 this year, maybe 25. But I'm not really looking for other stuff. I wouldn't mind doing college football again. If somebody asked, I would do it, but I'm not out beating the bushes. You know, and it's my business is what have you done for me lately business, you know?
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
You know, once the Pac-12 kind of changed over. I'd been doing it for 40 years, so I was the old shoe, and that's understandable to me. And so I did some college football, but it was for root sports and different little networks. But again, that's all changed now. And so I had my time. I had my moment. I have no regrets. I got out on my terms. Nobody fired me. I don't know if there's a lot of guys who can say that.
Yeah. It's a fun world. It's a world, there are a lot of people that go, I would love to do that, but if they knew half the garbage that takes place
It's all work
within it that you've got to deal with, they may not like it as much, but it is
it's all work. All the preparation is the work. Being on the air doing the game is the easiest thing to do.
Well, that's just like being an athlete. It's all, if you're doing it the right way, you're working your butt off all week or in practice, and then hopefully it's paying off in the game. And the game, if you're really in the zone, almost becomes easy. If you're having one of those days, we don't always get those days, but when you get those days, and you're striking out 7 and 3 innings, it's just beautiful, because that's all the work and the preparation that you put into it paying off.
Right.
And there's nothing like that.
Right. You're right. Yeah.
And again, great moments, not only for the athlete, but the fans, the people that are at the stadium when they are clapping and having a great time. And you get to be a part of that. You're just basically, you're monitoring history, some things that are just naturally happening in front of you that 20 years ago, it was different. But 20 years from now, people will pat you on the back and say, I remember that call that you made for that game. And
that's what
you may not remember it specifically. Those are the real cool things, aren't they?
Yeah, that's what you hope, and I mean, I've always said you only get, I don't know, to put a number on it, maybe 20 moments in your career that are really climactic moments, and you want to hope that you say the right thing, and to me, Al Michaels is the best I've ever seen at that. And I would say he gets maybe 60%. And to me, that's a really high mark. I if I were to grade myself of the big moments that I've had, and I've had my share, I hope I got 25% of them right. And when I say right, I mean, I wouldn't take back a word or the timing or, they weren't, I didn't do a lot that were wrong, but I wish I'd have said this, or I wish I'd have jumped out earlier, or I wish I'd have come back earlier, or whatever it happens to be. But Al's the best I've ever seen, starting with, do you believe in miracles? That's the line you want at the end of a big event. You want to be able to say the right thing.
And his comment, do you have any similarity in sharing what he did? He goes, he realized that this was becoming a tremendously big moment, and he just wanted to stay within it. Just let the game happen.
That's what you do.
Describe what you see. And
that's what you do.
Because it's never about you. It's always about the other guys. That they're the ones that are playing.
Absolutely.
They're the ones that are doing it. So just
if you
glorify them.
And if you happen to be working with a color analyst who goes right over the top of it, you just want to smack them. Because I mean, ideally, what you want to do is call the play or the moment and get out of the way. And let the crowd go and let the players or whoever it is, even if it's an individual sport, hoop and holler and everything that goes with that. And then you can let your color analyst, whoever it happens to be in whatever sport it happens to be, come in and say, what happened? How did that happen? And then you hope that he lays out or she lays out. And then you can capsulize it at the end. What an event, what a day. 1 in a million kind of thing. We're not going to see that again soon. That's a wrap. Say goodnight. That's
I've been told by some of my friends, and please forgive me, this isn't about me at all, but maybe this has happened in your booth experience, where there's a fantastic play, and you and your color guy go, what a catch! And you do it simultaneously. You're not stepping on each other. You're just both saying that was something that was incredible. And then the description of it isn't too much. It isn't too little. It's Goldilocks, right? It fits just right in there, and it makes sense, and it makes it so easy for you to follow up with, like, and there, you got a chance to score, or you did just score. The lead change, all of the other dramatics that are a part of it. So big plays, working together with someone, not one that you like, and two that you work well with, what a blessing that is. And then 3, if you have a good broadcast, that's more icing on the cake.
Absolutely. And the one that there's one call that I've always wanted back for several reasons, but it was the 7 lateral game in the big game, the Cal Stanford game. So there were 3 different calls of that, because I was doing a replay broadcast, and I was doing it for Stanford. No, I was doing it for Cal, and another guy was doing it for Stanford, and then Joe. In fact, it was Ron Barr was doing it for Stanford, and Joe Starkey, which is the call you always hear.
Yes,
was the Cal radio guy.
The Cal band, the best Stanford band's on the field.
One of the best calls in the history of sports.
It's hilarious. His voice cracks.
I tell him that every time I see him. Great call. Yeah. Well, what happened for me is a penalty flag went down, and one of Don Klein's things it was to me, if you see a flag drop, don't get crazy. And let's see what the flag is, before you get crazy. So I saw the flag drop, and in my mind it was saying they were going to call it back because his knee had touched. And so the play goes on, goes to the end zone. I said, wait, hold on, let's see if flag's down, waving. The crowd is going crazy. And my color commentator was a guy named John Beasley, first game he'd ever done. And he was a Cal guy. So that conglomeration. So now I'm saying, wait, let's see, I don't know, let's see. And then the referee signals touchdown. Then I said, touchdown! And from that moment, John Beasley was over the top, and he was a Cal guy. Touchdown, you believe it? They scored it. And all he did was inaudible screaming, for the next minute. So I couldn't even get back in to cap it, And I've always said that's and then you come back and say, one of the greatest plays in college football history. It's going to be remembered for all these years. Not from my call. It's not going to be remembered, But that's a call I always said. I wish I had back.
That reminds me, that brought about one of the all-time great pranks. The Stanford student newspaper printed a copy of the Daily Californian, right, to make it look like it was Cal's paper, and drove it over to Berkeley and put it in all the boxes so that everyone would read it in the morning. And it says NCAA reverses Cal win. And it had a picture of Joe Cap with his head in his hands. And the quote said, "I can't believe they took it from us." I mean, it had people believing. Also, you mentioned that you did the replay. So this reminds me, did you ever work with a guy named Bud Ferrillo?
No, but I knew Bud.
I have to tell this. So Bud Ferrillo did the replays of USC games in the 1970s. The SC games, they played Stanford they played Notre Dame in 1974, the famous 55-24 game where they rally and they win. And the regular game is on CBS, and it's called by Keith Jackson. But there was a broadcast on KCAL 9 in Los Angeles, and it was Bud Ferrillo and the magnificent Scott. What was his first name? Green Bay Packers.
Lindsey Scott.
Announcer.
Oh,
last name was Scott.
Lindsey Scott.
No, it wasn't Lindsey. Anyway, those were the 2 guys who did it. And this was, like I said, this was a replay. So a few years back, I get a hold of a tape of this game, because this is one of the all-time, if you're a Trojan, it's hallowed ground. And so I'm listening to it, and it's the KCAL version. It's not the CBS version. Ferrillo, I think he drank a little bit during the games. And he was a big SC guy. He was a homer all the way. Scott was more, professional. But as SC starts to rally and it becomes unbelievable, Bud comes up with some of the great. He goes, I have the solution for the drug problem in America. Watch this game, and you'll get so high you'll never want to do drugs again. And at another point, the camera is honing in on all these beautiful USC cheerleaders. And Bud is a little politically incorrect and maybe drinking, starts intimating maybe what the party is going to look like at the frat house after the game with some of these cheerleaders. And it's like, Bud, my God, man. I mean, you just couldn't get away with that today.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
yeah, I still have that tape, and it is.
Chick Hearn was another great LA broadcaster. You know, did the Lakers for all those years, but they were on Prime Ticket also, and so Chick did whatever, you know, other sports there too, and he was doing a tennis tournament at the Forum, and Chick was not exactly politically correct either, and so they took a shot of a couple from the Baha'i faith. So they had, you know, they wear the white turban and all white, you know. And so they take a shot. The guy has a big beard. They take a shot of him. And Chick says, I just brought a rug from that guy last week. It was the wrath of God. I mean, you know, because that time was heading toward political correctness, you know. And they almost fired Chick because of it, even though he was 90 years old at the time. But yeah, you got to be really,
Chicky baby.
Boy, you got to be, and especially with women's sports, you got to be really careful. I was doing a women's basketball game one time, not terribly long ago, a few years ago, and I called the defense man-to-man defense, and I got the wrath of God. You know, and in this market, you would imagine, you know, and Tara Vanderbilt was a coach. It was a Stanford game, and Tara, my wife wrote a book with Tara too, so. Tara was a friend of ours, and so I called Tara up and said, I'm getting a wrath of God here because I call it a man-to-man defense. I said, what do you call it? She said, man-to-man. You know, but I couldn't go out and apologize, you know. But it's man-to-man defense. It's still man-to-man defense. But it was, I thought, you know, those things are fireable offenses, you know. I mean, look at.
Well, yeah, I mean, you see Glenn Kuiper got fired because he
Tommy Brenneman
misspoke a word. And
Tommy Brenneman got fired for, you know, he's just resumed his career now. That was 5 years ago.
You talk about the Reds announcer?
Yeah.
Right.
The kid, the son. Not was Tommy was the older guy, right?
Oh, the Marty Brenneman.
Brenneman, thank you.
He did. Marty, I mean, that's a big
Tommy's
red machine.
Dad. Anyway.
Yeah.
Brenneman.
Okay.
Yeah, the young Brenneman,
right.
who was a real pro, a real good broadcaster.
Sure. And look what happened to Luke Walton. I mean, he's been unheard of. I don't know what he's doing. He was a coaching prodigy, and boom, gone.
He had a couple of issues, I think. Along the lines of what we were talking about. I don't want to say because I'm not certain, so I don't know. He was a great guy, but I did a lot of his games at Arizona.
Well, I once interviewed Bill Walton by voicemail.
And you probably heard him, you know.
I got everything I needed in a voicemail. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I did a year or two with him too.
Well, you've been. I mean, we could probably do this for another 2 hours, but we want to be respectful of your time. And you probably missed your lunch, so Joan might have a sandwich waiting for you.
No.
Harper, do you have any last thoughts before we let go of Barry?
No, Barry, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate your commentary, and we talked a lot about everything but you. So you did a great job of deferring and deflecting.
Well, that's good.
Telling
us about, I said, that was Don Klein told me it's not about you.
It's not about us, right? As a show's just about sports, and it's three guys sitting on a couch and having a great time. And with Logan, we have a fourth, right?
It's exactly the analogy I've always used.
But I think the
bar stool, not a couch.
The great thing about interviewing you, or at least having a friendship develop, is the smile on your face speaks volumes. Is that you've enjoyed it, you've made the best of it. There are some good times, there are some not so good times, but all in all, you were there. And
working in a toy shop, man.
You're working in a toy shop. That's not a bad place to be. Free golf, right? When you go play in a charity tournament, there's nothing like free golf, right?
The way I play golf, though. They didn't want me. I can tell you a story about that too, but I don't want to go there.
No, well, good. We'd love to have you on again. Would you mind if it being a regular contributor?
I really enjoy talking with you guys. Anytime, not a problem.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
2 hours and 4 minutes here. You think anybody's going to sit through this for 2 hours and 4 minutes?
No, just us. We're the only ones dumb enough to sit through it, right?
We do a
Steven,
deep dive
final thoughts
over
from you
here
before we go.
Oh, that's great. It was really good with you guys.
Well, Barry Tompkins, you are a legend. You're one of my all-time favorites. I was getting a lot of fan mail from people who said, you got to get Barry Tompkins. And
Nice.
so we have fulfilled that request, I think, quite thoroughly today on Take 5 with Steven Travers. That's a really good guest, and you're one of the guys at the absolute top of it. We've probably done about 105, 110 shows over the past year and a half, but this is one of the all-time toppers. A legend, not merely in the Bay Area, but a legend in American sports, in international sports, in Hollywood. The great Barry Tompkins.
They talk about
I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for being our guest. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Great to be with you guys. Hope to talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you.
We appreciate everybody tuning in today. It's been 100 yards of football. Logan Landers is our producer and engineer. Steven Travers, of course, the host of the show, and Barry Tompkins, the guy that with radio, with television, with sports broadcasting at so many different levels, at championship level, and maybe even just a high school game or two that he loves to do because it's a part of what he's very good at. We appreciate him sharing his time and a little bit of his life with not only broadcasting, but acting and being a part of some of the iconic events that have taken place in the sports world over the past decades. We appreciate it. Barry, thank you for being here. I'm Harper LeBel saying thank you for tuning in, everybody. We appreciate it. If you like the show, please say thank you and tune in and tell a friend. We would certainly appreciate that. In the meanwhile, we hope you have a fantastic